All right, good day. Happy Juneteenth and welcome to this Q&A webinar for community leaders. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Natasha Udugama. I'm the Program Manager for International and Community Engagement with Thriving Earth Exchange. I am one of your co-hosts for today's webinar. My other co-host today is Erin Gleason, our Program Manager for Policy and Engagement, and the Manager for the Science Policy and Engagement cohort. She will tell you a little bit more about that cohort and its upcoming deadlines. Erin, over to you.
Sure. Well, hopefully you've all seen that we are currently recruiting for a cohort that we're calling the Science Policy and Engagement cohort. The deadline for that is next Friday. So if you haven't already applied, please do, because we'd love to see your application in on that. And I apologize, my cat is, yes, going to be very helpful. This cohort is kind of special in that it's really bringing in new elements of training to the Thriving Earth program. And those elements are really focused on how we as fellows, as communities, as scientists can better engage with the broader public, with policymakers, and with the media from the very beginning of starting these projects. Because we kind of have a tendency, just all of us, when we finish something, then we want the recognition. We want to then show policymakers or the media what we've done. And the idea is that this really starts at the beginning, and those different audiences kind of come along for the journey with us and build a much greater appreciation, not only for what that specific project is doing, but also for science. So this cohort will involve a little bit more engagement actually in the communities with some special training, and some fellows that have even more training than the fellows that we've already had about how to do those elements really well.
Thank you, Erin. For those of you unfamiliar with Thriving Earth Exchange, a brief description. We are a program of the AGU, a nonprofit scientific association of earth and space scientists with over 60,000 scientists studying everything from the core of the earth to the surface of the sun and everything in between. These members, plus over 200,000 affiliates, are located in about 137 countries. Thriving Earth Exchange leverages these scientists to work with communities of all types to work together on local issues related to climate change, weather variability, natural hazards, and natural resources. The purpose of today's webinar is to give you a chance to listen and ask questions of our guest speakers. If possible, please put your cameras on, especially when you're asking questions, if not during the entire webinar. So, introducing our featured community leaders in reverse alphabetical order, just to keep things a little exciting. If you can please raise your hand, community leaders, when I introduce you. Tamah Yisrael is the Executive Director of Builders of the Highway Foundation, a national nonprofit based in New Orleans, Louisiana. She and Amy Stelly serves the New Orleans community as an advocate for the redevelopment of the Claiborne corridor with Claiborne Avenue Alliance. She has advocated for water safety and water management, written about the value of public engagement, lectured on community garden design and the history of open space in Tamah. Drew Kane is a land use planner at the City of Cambridge Community Development Department. And John Bolduc is an environmental planner with the City of Cambridge Community Development Department, where he manages climate change initiatives. Erin and I will kick things off with a couple of questions, but please jump in with your questions. To ask a question, please either raise your hand in the box, in the participants box, or simply type what you'd like into the chat window. So maybe just to start things off, let's go with whoever would like to start. If you can just tell us briefly about your community and the priority that you brought to Thriving Earth. How did you hear about us and what motivated you to apply?
Well, I'll start. I live in the Claiborne corridor. I grew up in the Claiborne corridor, and the Claiborne corridor has an urban highway as its central element. And those of us who live here have long been concerned about its effects on health. The effects on the economy are pretty obvious. This area has suffered from a lot of disinvestment. So a colleague of mine who knew I was looking for assistance to actually make a case for removing the highway suggested the Thriving Earth Exchange program. He had heard about it. I inquired, and Tamah and I went and pitched the project, and we were selected. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, and have absolutely no regrets.
And I'll go next.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'll just go next. Just to add to what Amy has provided, we're working along the Claiborne corridor in historic New Orleans, which is traditionally, in historical times, was a very thriving African-American community, very affluent, wealthy area for Black people. And during the urban renewal era, the interstate was brought through that corridor and pretty much disrupted the entire ecosystem. So here, where I've been placed in that area, I actually developed a property along the corridor, and seeing that from a perspective of like developing a property and some of the environmental factors that go along with it and the conditions that people are exposed to, it became very, very important that in an effort to really figure out how to clean it up, what is the core of the problem and what are some of the things that are contributing to it. And as Amy mentioned, we understood that I-10 expressway and some of the particulates and the water management issues that are related to it just really help make, just looking at that from a perspective of data, it really helped us see it a little bit more clearly. So that for us, that for me personally, seeing that through the lens of data just helped make me understand why it was more important to advocate for taking this infrastructure down.
John, I might allow John to give the backstory of the contact with Thriving Earth, because I sort of joined a little bit as it was getting going. So I'm happy to piggyback on John's history with Thriving Earth. But John maybe gives the origin story up front with that.
Yeah. Okay. So in Cambridge, we've been working on the problem of climate change and how it's going to impact the community. So, we do a lot of work on sort of addressing the cause, which is greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuel combustion, but we're working a lot on the other side in terms of flooding impacts and heat impacts. So we're in New England, and we don't typically worry too much about heat. We're worrying more about it being cold. But we know with climate change that our climate is shifting to be to a warmer range of temperatures, and that through climate science we understand, for instance, that the number of days over 90 degrees is going to more than triple by 2030. So we expect to have over a month of 90-degree weather, and then going further out in time even more, so that 2/3 of our summer months will be over 90 degrees. So that's a very different kind of New England. And besides the increasing temperature, we have a problem in Cambridge called the urban heat island effect, because about 60% of the city is impervious surfaces between the buildings and pavement and so forth. So, that adds on another probably 4 to 10 degrees of temperature wherever you are. So we've tried to understand our vulnerabilities, we've done both physical and social impact analyses, and then we're devising a climate change preparedness and resilience plan now. We've done 2 neighborhood plans, and we're doing the citywide plan. And so for that, we have a bunch of different kinds of strategies around buildings and infrastructure and around people, and also around green infrastructure. So we understand, fairly well where all our impervious surfaces are. We know our tree canopy. We've mapped that a few times. But the sort of the piece of the puzzle that we haven't understood well, which we know is a factor, is sort of the albedo of the city, or the reflectance of the city. So when the sun hits the city, how much of it's absorbed and how much is bouncing back out into space. That obviously affects our temperatures. And so we knew of the Thriving Earth Exchange because of the 1,000 newsletters we get, and we read about it. And there was a project in the Boston area, in the town of Brookline, actually, the Urban Heat Island project that I was aware of. And so when the opportunity came up, we decided to ask for help in figuring out a method for mapping and measuring the albedo of the city. And I guess we'll get more into the details of that later. But basically, this was a way to sort of fill in a missing piece that we just didn't have the capacity to do at the local level.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that quickly, I mean, Cambridge, the majority of the buildings in Cambridge are sort of late 19th century to mid 20th century. They're wood frame, triple, what they call the triple decker. So it's a 3-story wood frame building with dark roofs primarily, and that's what, John, what's the percentage of the city that's basically residential building stock?
Yeah, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but yeah.
Quick quiz, but and then it's interesting because there's then this sort of dichotomy that it jumps to larger commercial office, research and development buildings in some of the commercial districts, particularly in an area called Kendall Square. So like John was saying, New England is unique in that it's exceptionally densely populated, but it's a lot of historic buildings that can heat up quickly, especially when you've got dark roofs. And it's really densely populated too. So parts of the city can be fairly lush, but there are other parts of the city where the neighborhood's dense enough that the tree canopy is fairly thin. So we've kind of got this compounded effect of certain parts of the city having a thin tree canopy and also being really densely populated with buildings that weren't necessarily meant to, deal with this sort of heat.
And I would say, so we're obviously we can't do much about temperatures going up because it's a global effect, but the urban heat island problem is of our own making. It's because of the way we've developed and constructed, not on purpose, but that's what's happened. And so with our plan, the question is, well, how can we manipulate our urban form so that we can reduce the urban heat island effect? And we know we could do that by reducing the amount of pavement. We can add more tree canopy over time. And then but we know the other thing that we could modify is the albedo of the city. So we want to be able to play with all the levers that we can to reduce the urban heat island effect.
Thank you. I'm sure many of you are chomping at the bit to ask some questions, so I'm going to open it up and see if anyone would like to either raise their hand or just type a question in the box, or just unmute yourself and please ask a question.
I have a question for Tamah and Amy. Just if you could tell us a little bit more about how you all and members of your community in the corridor there, Claiborne corridor, were involved with the TEX project. If you can just sort of fill that in for us so that we can understand that better.
Okay. Well, actually, the scientist that selected us came from LSU School of Public Health, which is in the corridor, actually. And the PhD who led the study had a soft spot in her heart because her dad was the planning director when Claiborne was erected. So we both grew up as children. It was a really sort of parallel stories, but very different. So that is how the text part, that's how we were selected. And that is the connection between the scientists and our community. Once the team at LSU gathered all of their data, we decided to involve children in the community because one of my personal goals was to take that scientific language and actually make it accessible to everyone, because we get reports from scientists and maybe we can read them, but if you have a 4th or 5th grade education, then it is not something that you are going to turn to very readily. So the children at one of the neighborhood schools in the corridor actually verified LSU's data. And what would happen is, as they discovered things about pollution and particulate matter and noise and emissions, they would then go home and talk to their parents, particularly when they would ride along the interstate through the corridor, and they as children understood that there were other ways. So one of the things we did was actually take them to, there's a park called the Lafitte Greenway that intersects the corridor, and it's walking distance from the school. So they were actually able to walk to the corridor on Claiborne and do some of their testing. So they got really immersed in the science, and as a result, wrote their own paper, did their own drawings that showed their own impression. But the most important thing, I think, was they talked to their families about what they were discovering. And because they're kids, we were able to get news coverage on radio, television, and in newspaper, because kids are cute and they had something to say. So we took a very different avenue when it came to getting community involved. And then we took the information from the students at LSU School of Public Health and the information that the kids developed, and then we presented that at a city council meeting. So the information, in essence, was spread even farther through a council committee meeting. So as we go farther, and that was one of the agreements we made when we signed on to the project, that we would make sure that the information that the science community gave to us was distributed to the broader public. So we, again, it's about pulling those different communication levers. That was our way of informing community, but also getting community involved in a way that is different, because most people think kids don't know anything or they don't have anything to say, and that is absolutely incorrect. They do. They have quite a bit to say, and they're very observant, and we need to listen more. So that was our strategy for getting community involved.
And I just kind of want to add some, I guess, a historical piece about some of the work too, because we were already working around advocating for responsible development in the area. There had been campaigns to put more development on top of core development. And so as a community, this was very concerning to us because of like the health conditions. But even before that, we had experienced like some major flooding in the city. So the water management, of course, on top of the health and the noise pollution and living around this heavy traffic area just really made it evident that we needed to do something. And we knew something was wrong, but how do you quantify that? So for us, you know, we had participated, like as residents, we had participated in so many studies conducted by institutions outside of the community, but that data doesn't relate to what is happening within the community, nor is it even accessible or even legible for community members to be able to use that data to either advocate or have greater understanding about the conditions. So the big piece for me when approached with this opportunity, and which was even exciting participating in the conference that was held locally, was being able to see that we needed that information and being able to compile that and compress that into a plan while at the conference with the scientists that made sense for us. And so part of our plan was to model this data, which working with the youth was one piece of that puzzle, having them actually conduct the science, you know, conducting the testing around water management was a big piece. And it continues. So we're using that information to continue to campaign for people in the community understanding what their health, how I-10 is impacting their health, but also what can they do to figure out better ways to mitigate like some of the water and the noise. So we still have a lot of work to do, but yeah.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, then I'm going to ask a question. So your projects are in different phases. In Claiborne, you've finished, and in Cambridge, you're still in the process of doing the project. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience going through the Thriving Earth process? John, you're smiling, so I'm going to pick on you.
I
was waiting for Drew.
Oh, I had to unmute my button, so I'm happy to go.
Yeah, dude, go ahead.
Okay, I'll start off then. Great. You know, in full admission, like my background is more in land use and urban design. Slowly began to get into sort of policy, both waterfront regulations and zoning, a lot of industrial district projects. So some of the more scientific terminology that was brought to this project is new to me. I've been looking at some of our resilience work through flooding and heat on through a zoning and design perspective, and less from a scientific lens that John would bring or that the Thriving Earth Fellow would bring. So for me, it was an exceptional learning experience to be part of this. And our relationship with the fellow was really exceptionally collaborative and sort of seamless. I think, you know, Julia did an excellent job in finding the sort of person that understood not just the science behind this, but was a city planner, studied city planning himself, understood the role of policy and land use and zoning in the city, and how, you know, the development of the built form has a profound impact on climate change, both heat island and flooding. So it was kind of a seamless, not to say seamless, but it was a high degree of collaboration. And Mehdi Harris, who was the postdoc from UC Denver, what he brought to the conversation that was easy for me because he was good at explaining the science behind it was that understanding of the planning lens, but combined with his more, you know, technical background.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when we went into the project, what we were looking for is someone to help us develop the methodology for how we would do it. But I think that the idea was we would be handed the methodology and then the city would figure out how to do it, even though we probably didn't know exactly how we were going to do that. But and then we were, I think, very fortunate, as Drew said, we were matched with someone who had both the technical background to do, you know, this task, but also had a planning background, because this information that and method we're trying to develop is going to be applied in a way where it affects land use. So it'll, you know, it's not just a scientific thing, it'll affect the planning work that the city does and that we do with the community. And so, you know, what we're getting out of the project is going beyond what we expected going in. So Mehdi, our scientist, not only has developed the methodology, but he's actually done the modeling to give us the actual albedo measurements for all the rooftops in the city, which is way more than I expected to get out of the process. You know, and I think that was his way of figuring out the methodology, right? He would just do it. But now he's done it in a way where it can be handed off and others can do it. And then so Julia Genti, who is our project manager at the Thriving Earth Exchange, she managed the search process for the scientists, and she did a really great job of matching us with someone like Mehdi, who really goes over and beyond. And then Mehdi had other associations that were brought into the project. So he's been working with a program called NASA Develop, which is part of NASA. And so there's a team from that program that's been taking Mehdi's work and taking it further in terms of visualizing the data and helping us figure out how to communicate it to the public effectively. So
what was particularly effective working, at a municipality, it's like our level of expertise and technical skill can only go so far. So we often rely on someone like a fellow, partnering with the university is not always that easy. So we have certain limitations at the city because we don't have such a broad range of expertise. So if it had been sort of him handing us this methodology and that's it, I think we would have been a little bit stuck at a point to where we would have had to figure out and how to navigate a direction for this. But because he went above and beyond and created this partnership with NASA, it's sort of like they're now developing a really useful and kind of tool for us in which they're able to sort of measure the degree and the change in albedo over time. So they're looking at old aerial photos that we've had, and John, feel free to weigh in here, and then looking from 2003, 2010 to 2018 to see as the city developed, how albedo in the city has changed as well. So we have a comprehensive plan called Envision Cambridge, which is like a 12-year plan, typical to a lot of other cities. And one of the indicators that we're trying to set is to, increase the level of albedo in the city in the next 12 years. And so now we have a way to actually figure out how to do that, which has been just a huge, help to us, ultimately, to be able to begin showing people how we can actually hit these targets that we've set for the city.
And I mean, some of you might, so you're probably aware that Harvard and MIT are in Cambridge. You're probably wondering, well, why don't you just work with someone there? And we do work with various scientists, but my experience is, it's always hard to find someone to do the project that the city wants to do. Usually we have to find a scientist who's doing something that we're interested in, but they're already, invested in. And so I think the Thriving Earth Exchange played an important role in matching our need with someone who has the capability to do what we want. So that was an important factor in our process too.
I'd like to add that our process was also very collaborative. The strategy that we had was to allow the students to select areas of interest that they were passionate about. That was one thing I asked them, what are you passionate about? And they went through the corridor and picked things that really piqued their interest. And in some cases it was noise. In another case, it was actually getting a broad overview. So the first student that we worked with did a literature review that actually served the other students who came behind her, and then went through and actually, I want to use the word cherry pick, but they pursued their area of interest. Even though our partnership with Thriving Earth Exchange is over, our relationship with LSU continues because they want to continue working with us. So this summer, we will have 2 more students come on, and they want to learn about placemaking because they want to understand the nexus between public health and place. So this is very, very exciting that they are still interested in working with us. They are, there's no obligation, but they actually want to pursue. So we will have hopefully a very dynamic summer where we have one student who is very, very interested in policy, and she is a graduate student in the School of Public Health. But then we also have a young doctor who is really interested in drilling down on what place means in the role of public health. So I think we'll have a dynamic partnership and an even greater collaboration because the students are still vitally interested. And I do have to say, Adrian Katner, who's our scientist, has also maintained a very high level of interest in what happens in the corridor. So from her seat at LSU, she is looking at funding possibilities so that we can continue the work. So even though your relationship with Thriving Earth Exchange may end contractually, that does not mean that the partnership ends, because there are a lot of people who really want to pursue the work from cradle to grave. And in our case, grave means interstate gone, new boulevard up, many, many healthy places. So our lens for this summer will be looking at Claiborne, which is really, I don't know if any of you have seen papers, but it's pretty dreadful. The interstate goes straight down the middle of the avenue, and places are really in disrepair. We have a lot of vacant lots, and it's just very typical of what you'd expect when an area is ruined and disinvested, right? So we're gonna look at that through the lens of creating sacred space and healthy spaces. And the whole sacred space thing came from, it's one of my passions and one of my interests, but actually I polled people on Facebook about naming a healthy place. And then I did a separate poll about naming a sacred space. People could not name healthy places, I discovered. So we have to change that. But the sacred spaces ranged from a favorite park to my own bedroom to church. So people are much more able to relate to the notion of a sacred space. So the students, the public health students, have to really begin changing how they look at space. And I want them in particular personally, because I'm an architect and designer, or architectural designer rather, want them to begin to look at their practice in a totally different way, which I think is going to transform them as public health professionals. So it's pretty exciting to have gotten our start with a program like Thriving Earth Exchange, and to be able to continue it and watch it unfold and become something, number one, that people want to continue working on, regardless of whatever, agreements are in place. And people really want to help and do things. So it's very exciting to see the evolution. And now we're getting, because we were able to get such valuable information through the program, we have other professionals who want to begin partnering with us and lending their expertise. And they range from other design professionals to urban economists, because now everybody is beginning to understand, especially under COVID, how place affects health. So we've gone from, we need help, we need data, we need scenarios modeled, to having, this flower that keeps unfolding. So it's been quite a good experience for us.
It looks like we have a question in the chat box. Lisa, would you like to ask your question? Or I can ask it for you. I think you're still muted. There you go.
I'm using my phone, so this is, okay, so I'm experimenting. Okay, so my question was, I think those are both really great projects, very interesting, and I was just curious whether there were any surprises in the input from the scientists that, generated any new insights to how to approach this. And part of why I asked that is the project that we want to tackle is trash and illegal dumping, which are very difficult because, lots of reasons why people litter or, get a situation where they dump illegal dumping and stuff. Very, very difficult behaviors to change. So, so we're looking for new insights, I guess I would say. And anyway, so that was my question.
Well, I'll start. Because I am an architectural and urban designer, I had not really approached my work through the lens of public health before meeting Adrian Katner and the students at LSU. It's just not a way that I looked at the world. So the most surprising thing for me personally was that it changed how I began to look at place. So that was a good personal piece of evolution for me. In terms of the data, nothing surprised me. It confirmed, it did exactly what we needed to do, which was the great thing. And then having children actually come back and confirm that data was even better, because out of the mouths of babes. You know, they had no filter. And we know as adults, we have filters. So that was a really good thing that we got confirmation. And then other people may have experienced their own personal revelations, but we needed confirmation when we went in there. We just needed to really truth what we thought was going on, and the data helped us to do that. So we saw being able to quantify what we knew was going on, that was a win-win for us. And it also made certain aspects of the conversation about urban highways undeniable, right? And one thing that someone who wanted to do this development that Tamah is talking about, bad development on top of bad development, told me that he would pay a scientist to basically debunk what LSU discovered. And my response was, no scientist worth their salt is even going to do that work. So you just as well save your money, because if you really are truly about the science, then you can't deny the outcomes, right? They did their testing, they put it through their own rigorous processes, both scientifically and academically, because the kids did this for a grade, and Adrian was pretty demanding. So this went through a lot of layers, and I thought, God, you were never gonna pay anybody to counter this. You can't do it. It's just not possible, and anyone who takes on your challenge is going to be pretty easily discredited because there is even more data to back us up. So that was a good thing for us. That confirmation was really valuable for us in our project going forward.
And I'll just add, I don't mean, like Amy mentioned, nothing about the data surprised us. We knew something was wrong. The elephant in the room was very obvious. But what was most surprising for me in terms of the input from the scientists is how Adrian showed up, and her commitment to our process and her commitment to community was really a big piece for me. And then just the idea of the long-term, I'm here with you guys. I'm here. I want to help make this project and this process for you be more clear, so that community can have some understanding and clarity in what's actually happening with them. So for me, it was just just seeing how, even from the part of like the Thriving Earth Exchanges in developing the proposal, when we got invited to this, I had no idea what to expect. Let alone figuring out how to come up with a community of science project. But the support that we got from the Thriving Earth Exchange to really hear what we were saying and process that into an actual feasible project that we could actually use for advocacy really made the big difference. So just adding to what Amy said, the data was there, but the way the scientists showed up as community is a big piece that made the biggest difference for me.
And I just want to add one quick thing. Tamah and our other partner, Margaret, and I just did a whole piece for the Congress for New Urbanism about people who work in community being invested in community and really involved in community, because we don't believe that the work can be fully done without that kind of commitment. And it was great. And I'm hearing in both cities that the scientists are really committed to doing the work that we ask them to do and need them to do. And in both cases, either the scientists and or the institutions are going over and above to actually give us the foundations to be able to carry that work forward. So that commitment is a really huge thing. And I think we would not have gotten the same results if Adrian and her team had been halfway committed, like it'll help, but we did not see that at all. We saw their full forces come to support us. So we always try to lift them up as the scientific community in return, which is why I batted down that guy's idea that their data could be debunked, and it was just silly talk to begin with, in my opinion. But you know, the commitment from LSU made it very easy for me to go to bat for them in community when that was required. And I would still do it because they stand by their work, which has helped us, and we stand by ours. So it's a good match.
I was going to say, and so Amy and Tamah's story, I think, is very inspiring in these days when sometimes you question the rationality of our country, to know that facts and science and rationality can still be powerful. So it's good to hear. I think for our project, we haven't seen the data yet, so you know, we don't know. But one thing that we learned, so when we went in, the idea was we were going to map the albedo of the whole city, like all the surfaces, both the rooftops and the ground. And so, so, you know, it was explained to us that, Mehdi explained to us that, you know, the technical limits of measuring albedo on the ground, because the shadows from trees and buildings can obscure the readings on the ground much more than on rooftops. So we end up modifying the approach to only measuring rooftops. We're looking at ground level through other means, but you know, that was a change, you know, something we learned about measurements. So there's always some, you know, technical issue like that you have to deal with. But we'll, you know, we'll see what the data shows us in terms of the pattern of albedo in the city and what it means, probably in a few weeks. You're muted. You're muted, Drew.
Oh, Drew.
It's too bad I said something really profound. No, what I found interesting was, I think traditionally when I look at urban heat island maps, you know, the areas that come up are those with, you know, poor tree canopy, or, you know, just the concentration of building rooftops. And I think we might be led to believe that certain areas of the city that are larger commercial districts are going to be those that suffer the most from urban heat island, because it's basically a big surface of building rooftop. But it'll be interesting to see, because we have a lot of newer buildings in this sort of area of Cambridge called Kendall Square, where there's a lot of research and development happening. The newer buildings have taken the initiative to actually paint the roofs white or to have high albedo surfaces. So I'm interested to see, and we don't have it yet, but, you know, is that area of the city as maybe hot as we imagine it to be, because it has a higher albedo than necessarily sort of traditional commercial corridors that are older buildings from the 20s, and these residential neighborhoods that I mentioned, that we might have the expectations that those wouldn't be as hot. So it'll be curious to see the results of that. But yeah, like Jen said, we don't know the results yet. We're still in the process.
Thank you.
I have a
Does anyone else? Yes, please. That's all.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the strategies that you use to engage your community members. Did you use social media? Did you call people? Like, what were some of the things that worked for you? And what has the level of engagement been across different age groups?
Well, with ours, during the research part of it, we actually just limited that part of the engagement to the elementary school children, because that piece alone was a lot of coordination. We had to coordinate with the teacher. She had to work it into the schedule, the testing schedule, and that particular piece of the engagement became a big moving target, much more so than I had hoped. And also, this particular teacher, which was an unexpected thing for me, really did not want our team to be involved. She wanted to work independently. She wanted the students all to herself, which was understandable. Initially, I was upset about that, but then I realized that my dog is making noise. I hope you guys can excuse her. The good part about that was that the science remained totally independent of us. And in the end, even though I was initially not happy about it, I realized that it was better for the project. So we had limited engagement then, and then began to disperse the information through the city council. But then we actually mounted a tactical urbanism campaign, which consisted of putting posters under the interstate. I consider it an act of civil disobedience. It was not vandalism. But actually in one of the series of posters, and they are on our website, so you can see the tactical campaign, there's one that I call the warnings posters that links to the research that we got from LSU. So we were able to actually leverage the information that we got, and they produced a 70-page report for us, and use that in other places. We have also gone back to it to place it here and there in social media. So you do get stuff you can use beyond just the whole exercise of your engagement with the scientists and going through the creative process with them, the research process with them. Ours has been most useful actually post Thriving Earth Exchange, because we came away with a product that we could use in a number of different ways. So we can always go back to that information and pull out specifics. That's the beauty of getting a final report. At least that was the beauty of ours, that it is ripe to examine other things, particularly now. Emissions and pollution being one of them. That is again a big conversation, in respiratory health under the strain of COVID. So there's a lot embedded in there, and there's clearly stuff embedded in the work that we got that I had never imagined would be so relevant now. I mean, it's important when you're doing it, but the relevance of it suddenly went up. And in fact, in a talk that I gave last week, I talked about how valuable the work that we did with Thriving Earth Exchange is now. We can go back to that work and specifically point to things that really the city needs to remedy so that people who live in this neighborhood are no longer in danger. So the work that we have from LSU has a lot of legs, and we're going to get a lot more. So I'm really happy with how we've been able to take that work and leverage it to get more. And we were supposed to open conversations with the Port of New Orleans, because they have been proponents of leaving the urban highway in place, because it saves their truck drivers a whole extra 5 minutes. These are long haul guys. So 5 minutes is like a lifetime, right? When they've been driving for 3 days. So we feel that having the scientific data, now the port is looking at sustainability, which means they have to look at it, globally. They can't just cherry pick what works for them. So now we have information in our possession that we've already forwarded to them and they've looked at, that gives us a basis for saying what you are championing by leaving that infrastructure up that is past its usable life. You can't champion that anymore. It's harmful. And this kind of life isn't sustainable. It's not sustainable for the city, and it's not sustainable for all of the communities that this affects. So you get a lot of leverage out of the work, and that's not something going in. It's something you discover as you begin to use it and talk about it.
And I just also want to add to that. One thing one thing we also considered for New Orleans in particular was knowing when to engage or tap the community for information and knowing when not to. And in the space of what has been happening, we've already gone through so many countless studies and research projects. And at the heel, we're at the heel of another major research project that happened in 2011, then there were many more like other engagement pieces that left citizens and community members quite literally frustrated as to where's this data, where's this information. So one piece for us was, can we find this data? Can we pull it together so that community can have access to it? So engagement also means really taking a holistic look at what your community has already gone through and figuring out ways that you can tie them back to some of the stuff that they should already have access to.
Right. And I do want to add one thing. The people who are most engaged actually have been surprising. So millennials, for instance, are really wildly curious about the work that we're doing. We've had a Mardi Gras crew, that's a lot of foot soldiers, offer to help us because the work and the way that we've gone about it has been very intriguing to them. So that's another great byproduct of doing this kind of work and having this kind of engagement with the scientific community. The credibility that it gives your projects makes other people look up and want to get involved. And those who want to get involved can very often be surprising. I never thought we would get assistance from a Mardi Gras crew, and that's because their leader insists that they do community-based work. It's not all about parading and making costumes, and he sees this as a good cause. So as our work evolves and the body of work in science becomes richer, they have more to talk about as they help us spread the word, and we'll have more to offer communities. So fortunately for us, that groundwork with Thriving Earth Exchange, again, it's just given us leverage in places that I never thought of. I never would have thought that we would have had a Mardi Gras crew now interested in working with us to actually change the conditions, which are, clearly harmful. So it's been a great experience.
Yeah, I would, well, I'm just realizing I know someone who works on sustainability at the Port of New Orleans, but I could put you in touch. But yeah, so for our project, we didn't have a community engagement piece because we were looking at it as a technical thing that we would then bring to the community. So we will definitely share the data and go through the methodology of how it was developed. And then I think the engagement with the community is more about how to apply the data in terms of figuring out what the strategies are. But I think as Amy and Tamah said, it's sort of the technical part in a way you kind of don't want to make it too, you want to have that be sort of the objective part, I think. And then it's what you do with the data that's sort of the political part, I think.
See, we're nearing the top of the hour, so I want to ask one final question before we end. Can each of our speakers please provide some parting words and words of wisdom you would share with incoming community leaders about working with scientists, fellows, if you've worked with a fellow, and doing community science generally?
I would have to say, particularly with science, but with anybody, I'm a firm believer in asking people to investigate in areas that they are really, really passionate about, because I think if you don't, you don't get good work. I mean, if the scientist is really not interested in the work, they're going to do an okay job. They'll do it. But if you encourage them to really look, beyond, look in places that they're curious about, I think you will get, you'll have a lot better working relationship with them because you're not micromanaging. I'm not a micromanager, and I don't care to be micromanaged. So giving the scientists that freedom and independence, I think, is a really important piece. And also establishing a collaborative relationship where you have the freedom and openness to actually have conversations. If the scientists don't know what you want, then they can't really move in that direction. So you do have to have really clear communication that sets everybody on the same path. And we were lucky that everybody who worked on the project wanted to have that clear communication. So that is important. I think that is the first thing that you do. And then it's just encouragement and support beyond that.
And yeah, I'll go along the lines of the clarity piece as well. For us, we could have addressed many of the social ills that come along with I-10. It could have been the poverty, the crime, but we also knew that a big piece of the puzzle is the environmental and the health piece that came along with it, and a lot of those things drive. So I guess my advice would be to don't doubt the power of the scientific process in guiding your work, and guiding how you need to move forward and understanding the deep root and the core of what's causing the problem. You'd be surprised at what you find out. So yeah, for me, it was just really just seeing how those pieces connected to each other, the environmental and what's happening in our neighborhood. I personally knew something was wrong, but I just couldn't really tie the knot. So that would be my closing word.
I'd say for me, the two things that I've learned from this, one of which I don't say necessarily had to learn, but is to trust the scientists and trust the science. And I found that, to be pretty exceptional for Mehdi, and not to say we just sort of sit back and watch it happen, but we had faith that what he was doing would produce, accurate results, let's say. And I also think having a scientist that kind of walked you through the science. This is not my profession. This is not content that I understand. So to be able to ask Mehdi questions, have him walk us through his process, have him let us know what's important. If we have questions or assumptions, to like shut us down and say it's wrong, but in the nicest way possible. So I thought having a scientist that sort of put it to you in layman's terms was really helpful.
And I would just add a few things about the role of the fellow. So Julia Genti was our fellow, and she acts as the facilitator, and she does set up a process. And I would say I'm someone who, even though I'm a planner, I don't like a lot of process. I just like to get to it. But she said we need to do a work plan. We need to put the information in. We need to schedule the calls. And so I think trust the fellow to lead you through that process and go along with it, because I think it actually makes the project work better. So just that.